to the show, Max Blumenthal of the Grayzone and of Moderate Rebels. What's going on, Max? Thanks for coming on.
Good to be back, Niko. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I can't complain. Chilling like a villain in a penicillin, just out here enjoying our tall guy status in the progressive movement. And it seems like I don't know if you've noticed this just as an aside, but have you noticed lately? I know we had this conversation briefly before, but the left, unfortunately, is seemingly almost non-existent in America right now. But the ones that are actually causing the most problems seem to be the short guys. If I'm not discriminating, but
Yeah, the U.S. left does seem to have a collective Napoleon complex. And, being online, being behind a screen where no one can scathe you, that probably builds up your confidence a whole lot. But I suspect a lot of the trash they talk online would be stated in a much more polite way in person.
yeah, I agree with that. I know for a fact I've seen it in person. I've had to,
Yeah, yeah.
you
No,
know,
I mean, I've gone up and I've
had
confronted people
conversations.
who and had conversations where I just would say, "You said this about me. Why did you say that?" And just to see the look on their face and
Oh,
the meltdown that
it was
ensues.
miscommunication, man. I could have framed it a little bit better, but I didn't mean anything by it. It's like, no, you said I was a Nazi, and a fascist sympathizer. I don't know how that could be miscommunicated. Um,
I'll actually tell you a story about something that happened. I feel like the statute of limitations for telling the story is expired, or like not telling the story is expired. But it was years ago. It was like 2008. It was 2008. Yeah. This up and coming writer who was getting heavily promoted by the establishment, by corporate media, named Ta-Nehisi Coates, uh, for some reason decided to call me a racist on his blog. And the reason why he did that was that I had done a video piece on the protests against the acquittal of the NYPD officers who had murdered Sean Bell, who was a young black man shot, I think, 50 times in his car on his wedding night outside a strip club because he was with his boys having like a bachelor party.
mhm.
And the cops were acquitted. And Obama said, "We need to respect the decision. We need to just
I
go move
remember
on."
that.
And so I included that in my video. I just said Barack Obama said we need to respect the decision. And I asked people at the rally, like, what do you think about him saying that we just need to move on? Got some interesting reactions. And then he wrote a post along with this guy named Adam Serwer, who's now like the justice correspondent for MSNBC. And he wrote it under a pseudonym at this blog called Jack and Jill Politics, referring to the Jack and Jill club of like, elite black Americans. And they basically just called me a racist and said that I was like being a white supremacist stand for the Hillary campaign. But all I was doing was criticizing the NYPD for killing a young black man. So anyway, I actually ran into Coates.
So basically, because you weren't willing to just let Obama's comments fly, that meant you were a racist, basically.
Exactly. I mean, he explicitly called me a racist and maybe even a white supremacist, but called me a racist. And I felt like what I was doing was anti-race. Um, I was always like supportive of the anti-police brutality movement in New York and everywhere else. But anyway, so I ran into him at the Democratic convention by like the NPR booth of Jim Lehrer was in there. It was 2008, and he was getting the VIP treatment.
Of course.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's big. I mean, he's actually, well, I wouldn't consider him like a leftist, but he's much taller than me. He's like 6'5". And I walked right up to him and I was like, "Yeah, I'm Max Blumenthal." And he's like, "Oh, great to meet you, man. Nice to see you." And he
That's
tried
so
to shake my
weird.
hand. And I'm like, "I'm not shaking your hand. You called me a fucking racist. What the hell is wrong with you?" And he just melted down. He was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he refused to admit that he did it. And I was like, "You did it." And I quoted chapter and verse to him. And then he just lost it. And he was like being led away by people screaming at me. And he was
That's
like,
usually how it
"Stop."
works, right?
Yeah, but he was
Something
like,
like that happened. Well, I mean, several times I could list really, but there was one in particular at Bernie's LA rally. during the primaries, Fiorella and Pasta actually caught the campaign doing, some people within the state level campaign just making decisions that seem to be a little bit antithetical to a person who would consider trying to win an election. And so somebody within the campaign was, feeding us information as usual, doing what they do. And a person, I guess because they knew that Fiorella and Pasta were connected to me, the dude was like talking cat. It was a field organizer actually, and I want to say he was damn near. If he wasn't the state director, he was the LA director. And he was talking cash money shit about me and my team, like boldly, like, yeah, ignore this guy, da 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 da. Because I tagged him on Twitter, like, yo man, like I've been trying to get an interview with you, what's going on, type of thing. And so he didn't say anything to me, just talk shit to the people. Like, and I don't know why he decided to do that, because obviously we're getting information from somebody. And when I saw him at the LA convention, somebody had said the dude's name. And I turned, I was like, oh, that's that bastard? I said, hey, bro, come here real quick. Let me talk to you. And he was like, hey, man, what's up? I'm like, yeah, I'm Niko House. And all of a sudden he was like, I got to go. I said, no, come here. Let's have a conversation. Come on, because you said some things about me and my team, didn't you? I was like, now you want to back those up? I said, if you want, we can record all of it and we can go back and forth and see whose information is accurate if you'd like. But how about you never mention my name again unless it's to join me for an interview or my team for an interview, or I'm going to find you. And I like exactly whatever you think that means is exactly what it means. Don't do it again. He was like, all right, man. I have to get out of here to go do some work, man. But nice meeting you. Why do they always say that, Max? What's up with white guys and saying nice meeting you for everything?
Yeah, it's true. It's kind of like, it's like a tick. I don't know if it's genetic or what.
Yeah, bro. It's that I always joke with my wife because you see it a lot in movies where a guy, usually a white guy, will know someone else is their enemy or adversary, but be overtly nice to them. It's almost like a game to see who will lose their shit first.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess too, right? They do it in politics too. It's just bizarre to me. I just rather cut through the bullshit and you're like, yo, man, what's good? Like.
I mean, it's just, in politics in the U.S., like once the cameras are off, everybody's buddy. Like
that's facts.
That's something I've always noticed.
Except for us.
And yeah, right? I guess no one ever, like when we were raised, no one told us to just be like, everything is everything, baby.
Yeah, exactly, bro. Like, no.
You're just kind of like, you learn little like etiquette.
Exactly.
Like,
so in that same
my thing is whenever I do an interview, whenever you bring me in, I'm always like have this natural reflex of being like, good, nice to be here. I'm like, am I here? I'm not even here because I'm not there. Like I'm just, it's nice to be here. Man.
You're in the metaverse.
Exactly. Anyway.
Yeah, right. I know that's a whole different show. Good God. But Breadtube is actually known for ruffling some feathers, and for some reason they very rarely, if ever, seem to call out conservatives that can't get them clicks, but they love punching up, down, and sideways at leftist independent media, most specifically anti-imperialist independent media. And your brilliant network at the Grayzone, y'all did a wonderful expose, basically exposing when it comes to at least one Breadtuber, there seems to be a reason that they're going after anti-imperialists, and it looks like it was because they were paid to. Can you go ahead and give some of the details of that groundbreaking article, man?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say that all Breadtube participants, whatever we want to call them, it's sort of Breadtube is, I mean, you should maybe define Breadtube for everyone because it's difficult to define, but I consider it sort of the synthetic or official left, or what the establishment wants the left to be as expressed by YouTube and Twitch influencers. So
I would say that Breadtube seems to be they call themselves, I guess, also philosophy tube, which is like probably not true, but a lot of them pose as communists or whatever. I know that Destiny actually refers to himself unironically as a neoliberal. He has no problem with it. But generally, they all argue in unison CIA talking points when it comes to foreign policy, right? They're all anti-Maduro, anti-Evo Morales, anti-Russia, anti-China. But there's nothing wrong with, I guess, having issues with any of those governments. The problem becomes when they sound exactly like the talking points of the State Department, verbatim, whether it be the State Department in the States or the State Department in the UK or Australia or whatever. They also seem to become ridiculously popular with almost zero credentials, right? And in the case of somebody like, I don't know, Vaush, no one actually knows how he got so popular in the course of 2019 to now, I guess, 2022. But it really peaked his popularity around 2019 when no one knew who he was, while he was pretending to be a burner. And oftentimes, most of Breadtube, from my recollection, a lot of them fell into the Bernie category. Once again, Destiny being the omission to that standard. Destiny's an omission to a lot of standards on Breadtube, but he's still considered part of Breadtube. Now, I've had my theories for a long time, Max, by the way, about Breadtube being an op, like at least the majority of the journalists there. Because I think that you would agree that there are certain patterns that you see when it comes to the popularity of any particular journalist, independent journalists, or, you know, somebody on YouTube or Twitch or whatever. And there's always kind of like a point where you could say this is where they got their popularity from. This is their wheelhouse. And then you see that popularity grow over time. And it's usually to a measurable degree. Maybe they had a past in doing good journalism, like you were writing first before you were on camera a lot, and then you worked with other great journalists to create something great, and foreign policy became your wheelhouse, exposing the lies there. Maybe it's election integrity, like me when DNC fraud lawsuit, same thing with the Convo Couch. Maybe you're covering your elections fairly, but what you see on Breadtube is not that. What you see on Breadtube is something completely different. Go ahead.
No, I mean, everyone on Breadtube has their own bag. And I agree with what you said about Vaush, because I never really heard about him until I heard about some high profile Twitch streamer constantly attacking us and accusing us of, you know, being sponsored by Russia and being tankies who are in a red-brown alliance and all of this kind of rhetoric that I've become familiar with from certain sectors of the organized or establishment left in the US. And it just seemed like he was getting algorithmic promotion while we were being demonetized and being suppressed. I mean, we did an analysis of our YouTube statistics, our data on YouTube, and starting in March 2020, which was the time when the pandemic was announced by the World Health Organization, our hit count took an enormous plunge, and we stopped picking up subscribers. So there is an algorithmic background to all of this, and there is also institutional and state support for some of the most prominent figures, or at least one very prominent figure in the Breadtube universe. That's something that we confirmed at the Grayzone, that Kit Clarenberg confirmed. Kit is a British reporter, an independent reporter who covers national security and foreign policy and intelligence matters with very critical lens. And he obtained documents that were from internal documents from a British intelligence contractor that contracted with the British Foreign Office around the Syrian dirty war, named Valent Project, that was involved in setting up basically astroturfing Syrian opposition media to promote regime change, and also involved in doing public relations, propaganda, and psychological operations for the CIA and MI6-backed armed jihadist opposition, specifically the so-called Free Syrian Army, to whitewash it and make it seem secular and moderate and not actually allied on the ground with Al-Qaeda-related forces. So this contractor had cut its teeth in Syria. It was run by basically two spooks. One, Emil Khan, had the contract to do a separate operation and bring the tricks of the trade that he honed in Syria back home to the UK. And this contract came through something called the Royal Institution. The Royal Institution is a think tank and NGO of the British royal family. It's run by the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, and they are funded through the British state, through the British Ministry of Culture, which has helped them recoup a lot of their losses, their budget losses, through a kind of pandemic-related fund. And that money that came in 2020 for the Royal Institution was earmarked for video production. So you have at the top, you have the royal institution. Then you have, which is funded by the British state. Then you have Valent Projects, veteran British intelligence contractor. And then below that, you have the talent. They're not going to, do this directly. They need to do it through a third party, kind of someone who
Yeah, of course.
seems trustworthy and organic, who the public can relate to. And so they found Abigail Thorne of Philosophy-Tube, one of the key sort of founders of Breadtube, one of the most prominent figures. Abigail Thorne, certainly one of the most talented figures in the Breadtube universe. Her videos have very high production value. They're produced in a kind of
Bro,
studio.
can I tell you something? When I first saw Abigail Thorne, because I think she got a Webby, if I'm not mistaken, correct? At some point, or at least was nominated for one. And that was like a red flag for me, because I'm like, hold up, this girl calls herself a communist and she got a Webby? That's not usually how that works, but okay, let me check out her content. And I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, but this might be the best damn produced content I've ever seen in political YouTube. Yep. That's not the norm. It can't possibly be, like, not saying that you can't have a high quality produced content, but that's usually, it takes a team to produce content that high quality, and it becomes almost like you have to do a cost benefit analysis to consider doing something like that on YouTube, if you're on communist YouTube, and if you are that talented, because eventually you're just going to get suppressed if you're genuinely on the anti-establishment side of YouTube. And that woman's content was ridiculously good, like just for the quality of it.
Yeah, I mean, you and I would not be able to pull that off simply because we don't have the resources or the time. Maybe we don't have the acting skills, but
I don't know about
her videos involve
actor,
acting to do historical kind of reenactments. It's heavily scripted. There's artisanal sound, lighting, and I mean it's very theatrical. And
the accent,
maybe as a result,
she does everything.
She's picked up about 1 million, maybe more than 1 million YouTube subscribers, over 7,000 patrons on Patreon who she thanks regularly. And more importantly, and this is the key thing to understand about Breadtube, is that she gets positive coverage from the New York Times for being involved in de-radicalization efforts. And so does Natalie Wynn from ContraPoints, who's been profiled by the New Yorker. They're being supported and promoted by the media establishment because of their value in de-radicalization, because one of the things Breadtube is credited with doing is taking right-wing memes and undermining them and supposedly redirecting people who are drawn into right-wing politics and redirecting them towards the left. But the reality is what they're doing is taking people who are upset, disenchanted with the establishment, and drawing them back into something much more politically safe.
Yeah.
And so,
and by the way, that's not to say, but I just want to say, it's not to say that people can't be converted from neoconservatism, neoliberalism into an anti-establishment mindset. I've seen it done over and over again. I mean, I've personally taken part in doing so. But what you do is you lay this foundation of comfort by literally saying, yeah, we don't like Assad too. We don't like Maduro either. We hate the USSR. We don't like China. But man, those Republicans are racist. And don't you want to be cool, not racist with us?
Right. Well, they don't challenge. I mean, that's a good point, because if you actually pay close attention, I mean, maybe Philosophy-Tube doesn't do this, but other Breadtube figures will they'll sort of insinuate attacks or just like openly attack the anti-imperialist left. Openly. They embed it within their broader attack on the right and try to link us with the right, because I mean, maybe there are some, libertarians and, anti-war paleo-conservatives have always had shared interests with the left on opposing the war state. I mean, that's just like, I go on Scott Horton's show, Anti-War Radio, all the time. He's a libertarian. I am not, but we have a shared interest in stopping the war state. So does that mean I'm allied with fascists? And I'm not that he's a fascist, but does that mean that I am like one of them. No, but that's the kind of they use, they construct this kind of web of very vague connections to try to, I mean, and they do it. I've seen it done to you, to try to make the anti-imperialist, anti-establishment left and the anti-establishment right one entity that needs to be
Oh,
destroyed.
Owen, what's his name? Owen Higgins.
Higgins, yeah.
Yeah, he just actually wrote an article and supposedly it was about Tulsi, but somehow he ended up dedicating several paragraphs to myself and Jimmy Dore. Um, and
Yeah, it was a weird, it's weird. I mean, the
it
whole
was
like,
it was weird. It
because
was
it
really weird.
contains no reporting, and like he recently like accused me of getting money from some Canadian, wealthy Canadian guy. I've never gotten money from him, and he states it with so much confidence and says the money was given to me in exchange for me taking anti-vax views because like I've been out. And I
Yeah,
was just
I
like,
was
where
told
did you get this from?
I've adopted lately certain right wing extremist theories, conspiracy theories, and I was like, oh, can you name three of them? Well, he just doesn't do it. I asked
Yeah.
him in like on Twitter, then he ignored that, comes over to my mentions instead, and then said something. It was something unimportant, but I'm like, you never even answered my question. You are alleging that me and Jimmy Dore both like have espoused some right wing extremist conspiracy. What are they? You haven't actually given me listed any, because the reality is, oftentimes, if you don't mind me saying, for both of us, we're actually to the left of everybody that accuses us of being right wing, and that's what they don't want people to recognize.
I mean, what it really is about for them and what de-radicalization increasingly means is just kind of gatekeeping for the Democratic Party and punishing anyone who strays outside its boundaries. And that means straying outside the boundaries of the post Bernie left as well, because that is, as far as I can see, a part and parcel of the Democratic Party. So
Facts.
that's what you do. And you say Joe Biden is a racist,
He
and
is.
Jimmy Dore, I mean, he's just constantly hammering the Democrats because Democrats are supposed to represent us. There's supposed to be some people in that party who represent our views. And instead they're constantly acting against those of us who are anti-imperialist, who, favor, I don't know, Medicare for all, like the force the vote experience was very revealing. And
Yeah.
so they have to start recruiting gatekeepers and hitmen to start taking us out. And the best way to do that is to kind of insinuate some kind of secret crypto right-wing connection. And I've experienced that for years now, but really it started with the Russiagate era
But
coming out.
usually, if you point out their actual links, right? When you point out actual links, when you point this type of stuff out like what y'all did in that wonderful article, like you're called a conspiracy theorist for literally like, no, this is from you. This is leaked
Yeah, yeah.
documents. Your name is right here. The government signature is right. They're like, oh, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. But then they'll come up with some super elaborate conspiracy that you may or may not be taking. I'm not saying that they're like owned by Moscow and Putin's giving them the directions, but I'm saying it's a possibility, right? It's a possibility, and they will run
Well,
with it.
we were, you're the organized left in the US right now. I don't even know what to call them, but pretty much anyone who's in like kind of a left party, whether it's a socialist party or a kind of organization, they have been, officially supportive of vaccine mandates and all of the restrictions, which are
Yeah.
increasingly discredited. And then you have all of these people who feel politically homeless, who come from the left. And like, I talk to them every day. They're housing activists. They are anti-war activists. They're public school teachers who are not, they're cut loose from any organization, but they still are holding on to the beliefs that drew them into the left. So what is the left? I mean, it's just becoming very fractious and atomized. And that's why I think that's another reason why I think this article, and I haven't really gotten to the heart of the matter yet, why this article was considered so controversial. And it's because the initiative that Abigail Thorne was sort of appointed to lead, this astroturfed initiative, was called Countering Pseudoscience. And it was a parastate intelligence initiative to counter skeptics of the official COVID response. And in
Wow.
Europe, in Europe, it's even more intense than it is here in the US because you have these social democracies, these kind of nanny state governments that don't tolerate any dissent when it comes to when they come to a consensus on domestic policy. And this is something unprecedented for them. I mean, they think that it's a public health matter to lock down the unvaccinated in Germany, to start they're pushing for mandatory vaccination in order to participate in society. Italians who don't get the COVID vaccine, which is now weaker than ever against the Omicron variant, they are completely isolated from society. Like, the Washington Post has a really important or really worthwhile profile of an unvaccinated Italian citizen who lives in Venice, and he's unable to use the water taxis in Venice. He's a professional classical musician and an Orthodox Jew who just religiously doesn't believe in constantly taking a vaccine. So he's isolated. He can't get around in Venice. He had to leave the city completely.
Wow.
The other option is to swim across these cold sewage infested canals. So he moved to a country house owned by his family, lives there with his wife. They have very few social contacts. The countryside in Italy is like depopulated, and they are just alone, unemployed, living on savings. And that is the state of exception. It's not like you get thrown in a prison camp, but you get put in a lonely, cold house in the countryside with very few social contacts and no work if you go against this agenda. And these governments at the same time are facing unprecedented resistance all around Germany. There are protests in small towns that have never been there. UK protests have been huge, massive. And there's a massive protest coming up here in Washington, D.C. on January 23rd that's, causing a lot of nervousness within the establishment and the established left. And so these governments that are becoming increasingly unpopular are going to naturally seek to recruit influencers in order to tamp down on dissent and to make sure that that dissent stays on the right. So where else to go but Breadtube, to one of Breadtube's most prominent and talented influencers, Abigail Thorne, who has taken partnerships with other entities before, is raking in the bucks. But this time, Abigail Thorne did not acknowledge the partnership with Valent Projects. And what they said they would do in these forms, in these documents that Kit Clarenberg obtained, was to create a YouTube channel for her on countering pseudoscience, basically astroturfing the whole thing after collecting data, psychometric data, on members of the British public who are skeptical of the official COVID response. Can
I just say how wild it is
Yeah.
that you have people like, a Dr. Malone, for example, where he's literally, at least partially, a co-inventor with patents to prove of mRNA technology, and then people are shouting him down, banning him from YouTube, calling for just for his PhD to be removed and taken away from him. Meanwhile, Abigail Thorne is being astroturfed and given millions of followers and probably just as much money to counter a narrative from a doctor, literally the inventor of mRNA technology. That is bizarre to me. It's like we're literally living in bizarro world. And it's weird that not a lot of, although I would say more people are beginning to see it, but it's just bizarre to me, I guess, how long it's taken for people to acknowledge the same truths that if you paid attention to, you could use to figure out who you should be listening to. Is it coming from the government? Is it benefiting Big Pharma? Who's getting paid the most money? Maybe you shouldn't listen to those people. I don't know.
Well, and you have a large segment of the Western left that believes that the means justify the ends here, because they believe in the end of universal vaccination. They've bought the deception that this will end the pandemic. And it's clear that it hasn't happened. That's not going to happen. The pandemic will become endemic through other measures. Maybe the vaccine can be applied for people in risk groups to reduce the severity of symptoms. At least it used to be the case. I'm not sure if with all these variants, the vaccine makers can keep up. But what we're
It's just
seeing
they
is that
haven't been able
many
to keep up
people
thus
who,
far, if I'm being honest, right?
yeah,
Like
I
at the end of
mean,
the day,
yeah,
they created the booster for the Delta variant when the Delta variant was primarily affecting people in February and March of 2020, or excuse me,
exactly.
2021. And that's like, and the booster comes out months later, and then like, oh, our bad, Omicron's here. The booster that we're currently getting is not for Omicron, so it's like
Yeah, I mean,
they can't keep up.
The Pfizer CEO said 2 doses are essentially worthless, and that they could maybe have a new Omicron specific booster ready in March. By that time, we'll be like experiencing the Tupac Shakur variant or something. I don't know what variant we'll be at, but Omicron is already basically passed through New York City. Like it's going, the curve is going down in New York City. And that's just the way this goes.
Yeah,
It's not because of vaccine passports that ban little kids from restaurants that the curve is going down. But the point that I'm making is that large segments of the left have been silent on the censorship regime that has been imposed on social media by state forces when these should be the natural opponents of censorship. And it's because they are at least quietly supportive of the end. So they'll say, okay, well, screw Robert Malone. He was promoting vaccine hesitancy, so it's good that he's gone. And that's the way the left gets neutered and domesticated and turned into basically force multiplier for the political establishment and the global oligarchy that is directing this whole pandemic policy. So
I'm glad you brought that up, man, because the left needs just, I mean, because I think you and I both know well-meaning people on the left who will they may not fall for the other narrative, but they might fall for something else like this. And like the idea of the left being a force multiplier is so poignant. It's such a great point because this is historical. This has been the norm. You can't just have the right support something and get at least enough support in Congress or the executive branch to get something done or to push something like it's religion. I would say that one of the biggest obstacles, MLK Day was yesterday. One of the biggest obstacles for desegregation wasn't the right; it was the moderate left. It was a moderate liberal,
yeah,
the white liberal. One of the reasons that there was so much disdain that led to Gaddafi being assassinated to cheers in the U.S. was because of the left not sticking to its anti-imperialist views and doing more research that was out there. That if you would have looked at the history of Gaddafi, you would have known that he was friends with Fidel. You would have known that he was friends with Mandela. You would have known this if we would have, just gone by our leftist principles that we know. But when the left unifies in joining and singing the same song and tune as the establishment, that's whenever you see dangerous fascist policies take place, like what we've been seeing over this last year.
Yeah, and it's not just moderate liberals. I mean, it's the left. Period. The organized left, in many ways, has become kind of an arm of the biomedical security state in enforcing its objectives. We've seen in Melbourne sort of a counter protest group materialize kind of out of nowhere with these very well-made signs, uniform signs, declaring, we're pro-vaccine and anti-fascist, and get out in the streets and counter protest against Australians who are mostly just families and working class people protesting against some of the most insane restrictions on the planet, which have just completely been discredited. I mean, the whole zero COVID regime in Australia has turned into this surging case count, along with, restrictions, vaccine passports, and arbitrary continuing lockdowns. And you had people get out in the street to actually protest in support of this provincial petty dictator, Dan Andrews from the Labour Party, who were from the radical left there, against and brand all of these people, including, Aboriginal speakers, Aboriginal leaders, as fascists, calling them all fascists. And that's basically a call for the state to not only embrace this kind of de-radicalization mentality, the same kind of policies that we saw the UK adopt towards Muslims as a whole through the prevent, counter-radicalization policy, but to actually police them, surveil them, treat them as a national security threat. And it's the same thing we saw when segments of the left, and I'm talking about the radical left here in the US, freaking out about January 6th. I mean, I was there. It was a kind of it was a clown show. It was
That's a better way to put it,
honestly. In some senses, it was just like, well, I'll address what I think about January 6th at another point, but the point is, like, to exaggerate what took place, it was just, and to embrace this idea that insurrection is inherently like evil and criminal, as a revolutionary, is so insidious, and it created political space for the Capitol Police to expand into a national police force and for their budget to increase massively. When the Capitol Police, I live not far from Capitol Hill, you see what they do on a daily basis is primarily enforcing gentrification and beating up on the poor, beating up on the very large homeless population around there. They're not
hey, don't go there. You're not allowed to go there. Hey, don't go there. Not allowed to go there. That's basically what they do. And to the
exactly.
To the police chief who was fired that day or a little soon after, they did try to warn them about January 6th, at least in some capacity. And anyone who admitted that Congress was giving ample warning about what could have taken place was fired, which should be a red flag, because no police officer gets fired after an investigation, especially the chief of police of any police department. They don't ever get fired after an investigation takes place unless they're telling the truth. That's generally when you get fired, when you're a police officer. So, but you're right, man. Them taking this idea of a quote unquote insurrection, like, first of all, it wasn't an insurrection. I just got to say one more time. If you believe a bunch of conservatives went to coup the government with 0 guns, you've lost your mind. That's not how that type of stuff works. So there's that. But 2, at the end of the day, we've seen real coups. I mean, you cover them all the time. We cover them all the time on the MCSC network. That's not what a coup looks like. You don't get warned that a coup is coming. It just comes. And the U.S. was able to then flip that into what Biden has recently announced, a task force, a domestic terrorism task force. For what? Yeah. First of all, that's basically what 9/11 created anyway. You already have one. But it almost allows it to rebrand itself, the Patriot Act, into something that can be celebrated, and is celebrated by leftists, which is insane.
Yep. Because of the kind of culture war mentality that they've fallen into, where they view all of these quote unquote insurrectionists as racial supremacist fascists who are going to come for them and put them all in a stadium, Pinochet style, and mow them down, as if they could possibly do that, and that the real threat does not come from the FBI and the security state. I mean, they've lost the focus, which is people in air-conditioned offices in 3-piece suits who are unscathed by our protests and our street mobilizations. And they've gone after a much easier target. Of course, you know, it was contemptible when the Proud Boys were coming into DC ahead of the election and stabbing people and assaulting people and ripping down BLM signs on buildings and coming from out of town to do that. But if you actually paid close attention to what was going on the whole summer that preceded that, the security state was giving them the leeway to do that and was embracing a strategy of tension between elements of the left and right, allowing them to scuffle and encouraging them to do so as they encouraged the protesters in Kenosha to go directly towards Kyle Rittenhouse and company, and to create the context for the security state to intervene after violence and chaos, while undermining Donald Trump in key swing states. Showing that the country was in chaos under Trump. And it all culminated with January 6th. And then as soon as that took place, They had the fences ready. I mean, I'm not saying this was I don't know if it was a well choreographed conspiracy, but just to be here and see it take place, just like the next day, all of these 12-foot fences come in, tens of thousands of National Guard. The city is militarized. The inauguration is militarized. The media is filled
they knew about that January 6th, like what was supposed to happen, like days and days in advance.
I mean, I was there. I don't know if you were there, right?
So I was there so I had to leave literally the day of January 6th because we had an emergency back at the house. But my team was there, and so they threatened to arrest us for protesting outside of AOC's office, bro. There was like maybe 15 or 20 of us. And they were like, bro, they had the paddy wagons out. They were up with like 25 cops. We're like, bro, we're just here protesting for healthcare. What is this about? And then the next day, Pasta and Fiorella were confused. They were like, y'all had more cops out there to arrest us for protesting for healthcare than y'all had out there on January 6th. What the hell?
No, I mean, I was there, so I can attest to that it was the strangest thing I ever saw, ever. And I've been going to protests regularly for 20 years.
Yeah. I was there for the January 6th part 2 as well, by the way, where they had like 100 cops out there. It was ridiculous in like the full SWAT gear. And then they had the cops that were pretending that they were there for the protest, but were all wearing the same thing. They were all wearing like the skirts or the what do they call them? They had the short shorts and the graphic tees, and then they all wore Oakleys. Like, I'm like, bro, y'all kidding me? They're like, but we don't wear the combat boots anymore, so I felt like this would be less obvious. But I was actually the first one, I'm proud to say this, that figured out what was going to happen. I'm like, there's something going on, because I know that Proud Boys are the feds effectively, and I know that Antifa, it's likely at least the modern day version of it. I'm not saying everybody
totally infested, but also just filled with useful idiots. And that's what I saw.
That too.
Leading up to the fall, I saw, the BLM protests. Well, first of all, BLM was just completely co-opted, like right in broad daylight.
Yeah, the national organization.
Tens of millions flowing in from the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers, like just turning it into a bunch of NGOs who are pushing like rad lib identity politics in their own communities and not really.
And getting really rich at the same time.
Just basically becoming an exhibition of the libs of TikTok.
And the local, and I was involved with a lot of the local organizations. And a lot of our team they were always at odds with the national level. That's what people don't get. And I'm like, if you're
I mean, the Ferguson frontliners who I actually knew before there was this concept of BLM were incredibly upset with what took place at the national level
for years. And people don't know that story, because you do have to understand, you have to dichotomize the 501c4 organization that took advantage of a legitimate movement, and the locals who are putting it on the line every day, whether it be via protest and organizing. Like, that's important, right? And so, but what you could, like, Antifa is the idea of Antifa being like, not, it's what do they call it, a movement or an idea, not an organization. I'm like, that's bullshit, bro. The original Antifa was literally an organization. They had ranks. That's where the Black Power fist came from. And if you know anything about the intelligence community, they are unoriginal as hell, bro. They are so unoriginal. They'll just use the same thing, hoping people don't understand their history or know their history about it. And then all of a sudden, the BLM organizations at the local level were being overshadowed by this idea, quote unquote, of Antifa that was an organization, but were seemingly perfectly organized for every single major event that they'd showed up to, and always showed up exactly when Proud Boys showed up. That was a red flag for me, especially when you look at, I always say, where was Antifa at during Ferguson? But
I mean, the whole concept
Standing Rock, wherever. Like, they weren't there. These are places that I was at. They were nowhere to be found. And so that lets you know that there was clearly a setup of some kind being pushed. And I was saying, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I was like, this is going to be used to push domestic terrorism legislation. And that's exactly what happened.
I saw it, on a very intimate level, just because of my personal connections within the left grassroots. And I saw people get drawn into what you would call Antifa, who are not maybe necessarily. They went they went in on the BLM movement for a cause that I really support, which is countering police brutality. Just having been personally a victim of it, growing up in DC, seeing so many people be victimized by the police, it's something that's emotional for me. But I just saw this get taken so far away from taking on the cops and the domestic security state and get turned into this weird nihilistic freak show, to the point where there were organizations that I'd never heard of before that took on names, really, they would take on weird names. And I saw people that I had respected get caught up with a very shady set of characters, and then called on to go on missions into swing states across the country to create havoc. And that's when I said, I don't want anything to do with this. Like, just until you're out of this thing, I'm not speaking to you. I mean, I can give so many details that are there were just so many red flags that I saw. And what was taking place in DC was just this cycle of kind of low level chaos and arrests that was clearly benefiting the police. And the protesters believed they had our neoliberal mayor, Muriel Bowser, on the ropes, when it was completely the opposite of what was taking place. Like, she was actually playing rope-a-dope with them because the broader community didn't support this. So like, it just wound up, what wound up happening? Police budgets are increasing across the board.
I remember.
People who had supported the George Floyd protests are now hostile to it. Biden is bleeding support from his base. I mean, I think this involves several other issues and also like inflation and the economy, but it's part of it. The security state played jujitsu with what passes for the left in the U.S. so easily, and it's continuing to do that. I mean, I was building up. We talked about January 6th, and then what happened after, where D.C. was militarized. This is part of normalizing the militarization of American life and inculcating us with an atmosphere of emergency. And what happened after that was the vaccine mandates.
Yeah, and everybody forgets that mandate at first, what were they saying? Oh, we have to stop the rioting, so let's give everybody curfews, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
we were like, this isn't good, guys, because for some reason I just kind of have a feeling here it isn't going to stop at because we're rioting. Like, anytime you try to justify revoking someone's constitutional right over one incident, it never ends up well in the long run, and that's what we saw happen. It became, well, we were doing it because we were trying to save people's lives because of curfew, but actually, it turns out you can't get COVID if you're in your house by 11:45 and aren't drinking any alcohol in a outside, outdoor club. Like, that's what it basically became resigned to.
Yeah, I mean, COVID doesn't it doesn't come out at night. It's like a reverse werewolf. So that's just the science. But I mean, we've been talking about the George Floyd protests. There was an official reprieve where racism was declared a virus, and therefore people were allowed to get out into the streets and gather in large crowds. And I remember talking to a lot of people, especially Black youth, who said that they, were sick of being prisoners in their own homes and didn't have school. So this was a chance for them to actually interact with other people again and feel like there's a community. So that was, a positive, I thought, but it also showed how the science was completely dictated by politics. Yeah. And then once that became unnecessary, because it became, that was obviously a political tool to undermine Trump. May 31st, Washington, D.C. was looted. There were like riots. It was, one of the weirdest things I ever saw. I went downtown and just saw like bands of youth with sticks, like breaking store windows, barely taking anything.
Max is a crazy white boy, bro. Max be everywhere, just like, I'm just gonna walk into this riot, bro. I'll be all right. Like, it's cool. Like, I
mean, I grew up in D.C. in the 80s in Ward 4, so it was like I don't feel like this is just my city. And I talked to the guys.
My city, man. Love him or hate him. This is kind of how things are.
I talked to the guys who were rioting. They were just like frustrated youth who felt this opportunity, and they were allowed to like break store windows up and down Wisconsin Ave into Georgetown. At a time when small businesses were being basically destroyed by the lockdowns. And then the next day, after there were so few police on the street that night. I would walk around and I saw police where there were police, they were just kind of standing around. I literally saw them let it happen. And then the next day, what did they do? They brought in the military, just like after January 6th. The military came in, and I found myself standing 100 feet, maybe 100 yards below a military transport helicopter that was trying to intimidate the protesters. And Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was marching through the streets of DC, calling for dominating the battle space. That was the language that he used.
The battle space. Wouldn't that entail that both sides have weapons that they could use against each other in a fair fight?
Yeah, and we had no weapons, but they were shooting at me. They were shooting at us. I was dodging rubber bullets, percussion grenades, tear gas everywhere, just for us marching down the street. Whereas the night before, the police were letting everyone loot because it just felt like they were creating the context to militarize the city. And so they've been
I'm glad you brought
moving in these
There's
cycles.
so many people who don't get that. I'm like, it's not, the reaction to the police with the police is weird and it's over the top, but it's like, y'all didn't see the day before where they literally didn't care. You're like, they're just watching things happen. You saw that during, like you were talking about during the protests. You saw that during January 6th. I saw that in the week leading up to. Cops were either completely unaware or in some cases, like the chief of police or the FBI even warned them, hey, y'all should do something about this. We need more cops. And they aren't giving it to them. Or there's videos floating around where people are being let into the Capitol building or watching cops. Like there was a MAGA guy screaming at cops because they're letting them tear shit up. Like it's when you see what happens like before the over the top reaction, it makes you ask questions. And then just to bring it back to the article that you guys wrote, when you see the fact that there are so many actors, and that's the only way I know how to refer to them. They're actors, whether it be in media, independent media, or at CNN or MSNBC, which we see way too many intelligence assets that literally go from being in the CIA to ended up in one of the most prominent networks in the world. Like just to say the same thing that they would say if they were at the CIA and have everybody believe them. Or when you see you see people who end up on YouTube or wherever, and they're out there saying the exact same thing from those exact same people, and then pretending that they're your enemies, or politicians who pretend to be on your side. Or, you gotta wonder, guys, is this mostly theater? Is the names that are given the most recognition, that are making it into the Webbies, like Hassan or Abby or any of these people? Even I would argue TYT. I got my suspicions about them, right? Like, you have to wonder, is this a grand theater? And if that's the case, why don't you see more people calling it out? And why don't you think more people call it out, despite the fact that there is now plenty of evidence mounting up that we should at least be skeptical about these narratives coming from these popular shows?
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say, like you mentioned, TYT. They don't need like some CIA agent to come and tell them, hey,
no, they just like money.
Jake, here's some money. Can you go out and say something you don't believe? I mean, they've always been kind of like moderate, the voice of the moderate, respectable middle class left that maybe will criticize the Democrats for not being progressive enough, but fundamentally their interests align. And Anna Kasparian has been cultivated by aspects, or at least they've tried to cultivate her and demonstrate how loyal she was to their agenda when they brought her to the Munich Security Conference. And she was doing like paid interviews with Madeleine Albright, portraying her as like this feminist hero. So when she was brought there with other media personalities from across the West who were seen as sort of young influencers. And what they do is when they bring you into a context like the Munich Security Conference, which is a NATO event, is to make you see NATO as a bunch of friendly, intersectional, progressive-minded, enlightened supporters of democracy, and not as a permanent military alliance that exists for the sole purpose of keeping Europe on a constant war footing with Russia, and which has brought us right now closer to nuclear war or conflict with a nuclear power than at any time since the Cold War. And those are the kind of, activities these characters have engaged in again and again, like Nomiki Kant's going to the Oslo Security Forum, the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is run by a CIA asset, Thor Halvorsen, and she interviewed Sergei Popovich, who is a veteran CIA asset who oversees and trains color revolution assets around the world. And she said that she was fangirling with him, and then she goes and attacks me for going to RT's 10th anniversary. For me, that's just a totally different thing. I'm not going there to be, trained by the Russians. I'm going there to break the blockade between two countries that are supposed to be at war.
Yeah.
I was just going there. I participated in one panel there, but I went there specifically to state that Russia is not my enemy, but I wasn't going there to fangirl over the FSB. I didn't even have any chance to interact with any officials.
Also,
that's the same reason why I went to.
That if you would have went to Oslo, you're going to say the same thing in front of those characters as you would in front of RT. You're not going to deny an opportunity to speak in front of anybody if you can say your message without being censored, right? And I think that's a key difference.
What is an anti-imperialist supposed to do? You're supposed to complicate imperial objectives by building links with the countries that are being targeted by the most powerful empire in human history. You're not supposed to basically provide left cover for an intelligence operation that is doing regime change operations in those countries. You're basically superfluous anyway. So that's the same reason I went to Miraflores Palace to meet with Nicolas Maduro and, delivered remarks there on Venezuelan national TV to state that, as Americans, we reject the blockade and we are using our bodies to break the blockade of Venezuela. And I will do that in any country where the U.S. is blockading, sanctioning, surrounding with troops, and constantly antagonizing and lying to Americans about the domestic population and what they believe in order to encourage these regime change wars and hybrid wars. That's the role, I think, of an anti-imperialist, but also, I would think people attracted to the left would understand that. But the left in the U.S. has just been so domesticated, so neutered, and it's been, there have been official state interactions or through third parties with the left that have encouraged that domestication and created this kind of, and this is a long-standing project of the U.S. national security state. I had a 3-hour conversation with Caleb Maupin about this.
Great.
On my Rokfin show, Foreign Agents, where he, went back to the Congress on Cultural Freedom, where the CIA just directly cultivated left-wing literary influencers and political voices to counter the rise of communism in the Western left. And Gloria Steinem was a key figure in this whole operation. She spoke openly about it, said she found the CIA officers she interacted with to be enlightened and liberal-minded people. And now the CIA, I don't even know if the CIA is involved in anything like this today. It doesn't necessarily have to be. I don't even know what the CIA is because it is so fluid and atomized. What we see are third parties or cutouts, like the National Endowment for Democracy. This is a CIA, it was spun out of Ronald Reagan's CIA by Bill Casey, the CIA director. But it's run as an NGO funded by the US government, and they do what I described with the Oslo Freedom Forum and work with the Oslo Freedom Forum in training activists, civil society groups, supposedly independent media to encourage regime change internally and make it seem like a grassroots revolution. And NED partners closely with the Open Society Foundations of George Soros, anti-communist international billionaire, hedge funder, you get called an anti-Semite for talking about Soros, but that's, I mean, and there are anti-Semites. I mean, he's kind of like an anti-Semitic stereotype. So I think it's kind of dangerous to have a guy like that openly demanding that, this or that government step down.
Yeah, for sure.
Given his profile and background.
Soros definitely like worked with Nazis and was like perfectly like unapologetic about it. So there's that.
But I mean, he is
the key. It's weird that nobody ever brings that up, but he's like, no, I'll do it again.
He's a key funder of a who's who of sort of respectable left NGOs and progressive organizations. And his foundation actually is helping to fund the Countering Pseudoscience initiative of Breadtube's Abigail Thorne alongside the British state-funded Royal Institution. So this is not going to look like Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA was directly paying a journalist. The CIA doesn't have to do that anymore. But there are these cutouts and third parties that will create plausible deniability and do it for them. And then, like, when I talked about it on Jimmy Dore, Cenk Uygur will come in and say, oh, Max Blumenthal is alleging that the CIA controls us and he's a conspiracy theorist. But no one disputes the facts that were reported in this article or the facts that I've just elucidated or the overall analysis. They just deflect by calling you a conspiracy theorist. And I just, going back to the vaccine mandates and the whole official COVID policy, you see left-wing people who have been called conspiracy theorists in the past, who have been branded all sorts of defamatory, you had all these defamatory terms thrown at them, Kremlin shill, Assadist. They are calling people conspiracy theorists for taking a critical view of official COVID policy, for calling anyone who doesn't just look at all of these draconian restrictions and the censorship regime as anything but a public health response. They call them conspiracy theorists as further evidence of the domestication of the Western left. And it's really sad to see. I mean, I wonder what will be left after this latest concocted emergency.
I mean, I would say that I think they were probably going to end up seeing the left, I guess, not exist in its current form as much as far as making any change anyway. I do think that there's probably some conservatives that are going to have to yield as well. And I think there is probably going to have to be more of a populist movement if we want to see any change, which I guess, I mean, is probably the most effective way to get change in this country, if I'm being real. I mean, they assassinated Fred Hampton for a reason, right? Does that mean you have to align with extremists? No, I don't know why everybody thinks that. But there's nothing more radical than unity in the U.S., considering this is a country that has been based on anything but, despite popular belief. And so I think that that's ultimately what's going to end up happening. I'm not sure if the left in its current form, if it should exist, if it is a benefit to have this left is as much in tatters as it's been over the last couple of years. I mean, you get this left has led to what, like a Bernie Sanders? What does that even mean at this point? That movement they've become some of the biggest left, I mean, like actual agitators of the left, not in a good way. Like they've just become leftist agitators where they spend all their time punching at Max Blumenthal, punching at the Convo Couch, punching at Fiorella and Pasta, punching at Steve and Glory and all these people, and Richard Medhurst and Franco, but they don't ever talk about AOC, who's actually in office. Literally. This
yeah, I mean,
in office that has power.
I mean, beyond that, I mean, who's in charge? Like, who's the biggest owner? Who's the biggest owner of land in the United States?
Oh, Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, they don't talk about him. If anything, they kind of mock the idea that Bill Gates is some figure that we should direct our wrath
but then
against.
We'll scream, "Eat the rich."
Yeah, well, what I don't know. Maybe they don't like Jeff Bezos and Amazon and so on. I mean, but they're calling for lockdowns that are Jeff Bezos's wet dream.
Yeah,
I mean, this new narrative has slipped in that lockdowns never happened.
Elon Musk,
Uh,
right? They hate Elon Musk, which I'm not a fan of Elon Musk either. Don't get me wrong, but like, for the same reason that I'm not a fan of Bill Gates. Like, I know that they have nefarious intention. I know that their money oftentimes is ill-gotten and given through government subsidies or failed business models, and they're kept alive. I mean, I just found it really weird that Bill Gates like sold. I guess he sold his shares and dropped as CEO of
yep.
Microsoft as all of this stuff happens. And then he's put out in front of this the COVID narrative on MSNBC and CNN, damn near uplifted more than Fauci is. And I'm like, hold on, I thought that y'all wanted us to trust experts, and y'all not even putting experts in epidemiology out there. You're putting billionaires out there to tell us what we need to get done. And then the left, at least too many of them, are like, yeah, man, we got to defend him at all costs. But hey, man, you know, Bill Gates or Elon Musk is different. We just don't like that guy. Like, what's the difference? One, you're told.
Yeah, I mean, they're
like
not defending Bill. They're not defending Bill Gates. It's more just like he's a sideshow, and in any case, the ends justify the means. But in their mind, but their focus and their wrath is directed more towards people at their level who are close to them, who, when you attack them, whether it's Niko House or Jimmy Dore or whoever, you ingratiate yourself with the establishment that they threaten.
I don't get. I'm not that
so
important.
It's a good career move. It's a good career move, and you know, just the use of the term conspiracy theorist for people who are critical of official government policy on COVID, it just shows you how little context.
Bro, I literally posted an article. I posted an article from, I want to say it was Reuters or whoever broke the news about the CDC coming out and saying that the vaccine is no longer preventing transmission at all. It's no longer effective, even though they said that in the beginning, but whatever. And I posted just a picture of the publication and the headline, and they were like, wow, it's really sad to see that you've come to this. I'm like,
oh yeah, what happened to you?
I'm like, this is the CDC saying this. And people, I'm genuinely confused. I'm like, hold on, what do you mean? What have come to what? And they can't give an answer. They just give this reactionary, visceral, and emotional response. Like, oh man, how dare you say anything that upsets the narrative that I've already clinged on to? Like, I'm like, well, the people who helped you cling on to that narrative are saying the opposite now. So what are you going to do?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people also, we just have to recognize, have succumbed to fear and have fallen into a state of free-floating anxiety that colors their politics and animates their behavior on Twitter. It's not necessarily coming from a rational place. And that really does explain a lot of the left influencers who've gotten hysterical over COVID and are pushing for the real lockdown after they were so supportive of the vaccine mandate. Now they're basically saying they've lost confidence in the vaccine and the US needs to basically, I don't know what the real lockdown means. Does it mean
anyway, I guess? Like, don't go to school because the vaccine isn't working well enough, but mandate the vaccine and you better accept it.
Right. And you know, we need better masks, but mandate the cloth masks, continue to mandate them. You know, all of these arguments that you see are based, in my view, in a kind of in fear. And, you know, it's understandable people be afraid of a virus that has killed people, but it's not a solution. They're not offering any solution. If anything, they're just arguing against any return to society. They want some kind of civil sabotage until they can feel safe. And when you criticize these external mechanisms that have been promised to them as a guarantee of safety and freedom, even as it fails right in front of their very eyes, you're threatening their safety. You're increasing their fears, and you are becoming a vector of fear and disease, and you're threatening their psychological well-being. And so they just are going to lash out at you on Twitter or YouTube with like just some kind of rant.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be what's going on,
That
man.
the scariest thing is like that the safety blanket just goes away. Everybody just has to go back to school and work, and we just and this virus becomes endemic for so many of these people. And it's kind of funny. It's funny to watch, actually, or kind of it's tragic, but it's also kind of funny that the Biden administration and the ruling class is kind of trying to put the brakes on all of the deceptions and lies that they've deployed over the last 2 years.
Yeah, they are.
They're like,
but the people
admitting that we
now.
were right. They're kind of reluctantly admitting we were right. They're even quite saying, the death count was inflated with, deaths with instead of deaths from. Hospitalization counts are inflated because everybody gets a PCR test who comes in. They're doing it because the Biden administration doesn't want to take the political heat that the Democrats put on the Trump administration by embracing these inflated numbers. And yet their activist base won't let them do it.
Ironic.
Their activist base is like, no, we need to freak out. We need to go crazy. We need to shut everything down.
Our ego needs you to have been right the first time, because God forbid we were wrong for following Joe Biden, who has a consistent pattern of lying for 47 years. God forbid we listen to that guy and take it for the gospel. I mean, I'm a simple man. If a man who's lied to me about every major issue for longer than I've been alive tells me that something is going to be life or death and is telling me to do one thing, I don't give a damn if I promise you, Max, if Joe Biden said, Niko, don't jump off the bridge, that's the only way you can survive. Max, I see in this next life, I'm jumping off that motherfucking bridge. I'm gone. If Joe Biden tells me don't jump, I'm jumping. Cause it's just like, God, there must be gold down there if Joe Biden said jump.
I mean, I think you might give him too much power at this point. He's not really in charge.
Oh yeah, but if he tells me to do something, usually it's a lie or it's to benefit someone who is in charge. But we know 99% of the time it's never to benefit us.
Well, I mean, you look at the numbers, most Americans would agree with you. He's just lost all credibility. And it has to do with, on COVID, just the shifting messaging, just constantly moving the goalposts. And it comes from the CDC and it comes from Fauci, because they don't actually know what to do, but they believe they have to do something severe. It's sort of like a military mindset that this is Pearl Harbor and 9/11 and we need to defeat the enemy. And that instead of being humble before nature, recognizing that a virus that is airborne is going to be difficult to eradicate, and that we have to focus on treatments and therapies and things like that. Instead, they've convinced a large part of the public that this is a war and that the virus needs to be attacked, and that we all have to sacrifice so much, like the greatest generation that stormed the beaches in Normandy in order to do it. And so many people have buyer's remorse after sacrificing and realizing that here we are in another wave. And I'm
not gonna lie to you, Max.
They won't just say, "Oh,
I live in Miami. Yeah. I didn't sacrifice a goddamn thing." I was mad the whole time we were on that little, I want to say 4 or 5 months period that we were on lockdown. It seemed like it was 2 years. God forbid being in the state like New York, where y'all actually were on lockdown for that amount of time. But no, I didn't sacrifice a damn thing. I wasn't going to. Like, I was very careful about how I went about my business as far as how I interact with people, because I'm like that actually every flu season. If I don't know you, stay the hell from around me. You shouldn't be in front of me 6 feet anyway. First of all, that's the problem. If you're sick, stay your ass home, regardless of whether or not COVID is a thing. Like, these are basic concepts that I like engage in, but that's every winter time. But other than that, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have buyer's remorse because you listen to a liar. That's generally what happens.
Yeah. Well, the liar they listened to was Fauci and Deborah Birx in 2020, and they continue to listen, but the message has become diffuse, and it's coming now through people like Philosophy Tube, and it's just everywhere. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to select one public health official. There's just an army of self-appointed gatekeepers in white lab coats who have MD beside their Twitter avatar. You have Eric Fagel-Ding, this zero COVID fanatic who gets like thousands of retweets every time he says Omicron is not mild. We need to freak out and go crazy. And he's like a nutritionist who's posing as an epidemiologist.
Oh, there's so many people gotten famous off of like just pushing this COVID alarmist like rhetoric. It's disgusting, man, honestly. Like,
and now they feel anti-establishment because the Biden administration is trying to roll back the crazy and have an economy. I don't know what people think is going to happen, that there's going to be a lockdown. We're going to have, put all the positive cases and their contacts in quarantine camps. And that's going to be welcomed by the American public. It won't require massive amounts of security state intervention. And that somehow that is going to end the pandemic. It's just going to end it in 2 weeks. And like these waves won't continue, or like they won't blow through quarantine camps or anywhere people are gathered in homes. I just don't know what they think. It's just some kind of, it's gotten to the point where it's just virtue signaling.
It's not science anymore. A lot of this the rhetoric and the fear mongering and the alarmism, it isn't based in science. And I think that's what it comes down to. Like if I'm being given all the information, well, then at the least I know that my decisions are mine to make. And if something happens to me, I had the confidence to know, okay, if I do this, and this is a good chance that I'll make it out pretty good. And that's what it comes down to. When you have the security of quote unquote science, even though I know calling it science is damn near a cardinal sin nowadays, like calling facts actual science. But these people are not relying, their emotions are not backed by science, and it's evident in how emotional they are. Because if you show them science, the reaction to that science is crazy. But I don't want to hold you up too much longer, man. Go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you at, and where you stream at too.
Maybe I was the one holding you up. I don't know.
Oh, but, no, not this time.
These conversations are always therapeutic for me. I mean, it's nice for me to talk to people who are level-headed about what's going on. So thanks as always for giving me the opportunity. You can find my work at thegrayzone.com. That's gray with an A. Moderate Rebels. Our podcast is on YouTube. I stream weekly at Rokfin. My show is called Foreign Agents. And on Twitter at Max Blumenthal. Pretty much if you're watching this, you probably already knew all that. But thank you for supporting the work we do.
Oh, of course, man. Look, when it comes to foreign policy, you guys, and I guess I got to put Fiorella Potts and Johnny in that category right now. They just came from Nicaragua, out there at the inauguration for the new administration out there, celebrated for their election integrity, man. So you all do some amazing work, and I'm glad that I always have you guys to go to double check my crazy conspiracies about foreign policy, because usually it's the gray zones pieces that always help me put everything together. Let me read some of these Super Ray over here on Rokfin real quick before we get up out of here. Shadow Band Refugee, what's up? It's been an MCSC kind of day. Orale, Niko, and Max both. Break the state, break the capital, liberate the people. Already, man. You already know. Appreciate you, bro. I see we have another one. Teresa Alon, thank you very much. Says she's matching Icy Irony. She gave the first tip over there on Rokfin. Thank you all so much for the tips. Much love. And appreciate you, Max, for stopping by as usual, man. Make sure I go check out Max. And I know that you have your show with you and Ben over on Rokfin. They're two of that's one of the most popular shows on Rokfin, and it is like that for a reason. So go check them out over on Rokfin, rokfin.com/ your Max Blumenthal. Is it /Modern Rebels? Is it Peace. The first one or the second one? It's I think it's /Max, right? Let's look it up.
Oh yeah, it's /Max Blumenthal.
Yeah, there you go. So it's Rokfin, rokfin.com /Max Blumenthal. Easy enough, people.
You just go to Rokfin and search my name, search the show Foreign Agents,
Google,
and
whatever.
You'll find it.
Max, you're cool, whatever. And you're not the only one with a blue check now, bro. Don't get it twisted. Not on Twitter.
Hey, I got a blue
yet, but I got on Instagram.
I got a blue check like when it was possible. I mean, I would never get one today.
Fact. If they did, it's just to stalk you, honestly.
I just back in the day, all you had to do was send in a driver's license photo.
Oh yeah, back when it was super easy before 2016, basically. Yeah, yeah, not anymore. They actually denied me. I think Twitter denied me because I had Assange in my background recently. Like, and you're not allowed to promote like other sources in your like profile in any way. I'm like, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. But it's just mostly because it was Assange, not because it was another source. So, but with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream. 7 of Mikasa Sukasa. Like this video.